This video is all about this keyword in JavaScript. At the end of this lesson, you will be able to explain the 4 principles of the this keyword and demonstrate each principle by example. Before we go over the principles of the this keyword, we need to understand why we're learning this. Okay? You're going to see the this keyword all over JavaScript. It's not unique as a programming feature to JavaScript, but you're going to see it in other languages. The difference is that it behaves very differently in JavaScript than it does in, say, Java. So this is basically just a pronoun that's used in place of an object. The analogy that I love to give when talking about this is, imagine if you were to go over to your friend's house and you were sitting at your friend's house and you were playing games and there's food on the, you just had a lot of food, or maybe his dog just pooped on the rug. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, you stand up and you say, I don't like this. For us, outsiders looking into this little story, it's very important to understand that we don't have context to understand what this keyword or this word means in that idea. But if you're there at the table, then you would know what I'm talking about. If I stood up and I said, I don't like this, I'm probably referring to the poop that the dog just laid on the carpet. This in English is a pronoun. Same way it is in the programming language. It always points to an object, so that you don't have to type out the name of that object, but it points to an object in different contexts. It happens to deal with a very specific context of when that object is given. So it gives you that object's contents and context. So this keyword gives you access to that object, gives you access to manipulate it, gives you access to the items on it, things like that. It has nothing to do with where your code is written, but when and where your function and your code is called or executed. Okay? So there are 4 principles that actually clue us into what will be this. Okay, and there's things to look out for when working in these 4 different principles. And they all have to do with binding. This is going to bind to a specific object in different instances. The first is the global context. So if I have this function that's just written in the global context, and I were to console log this, okay, we're going to get the window or the console object where JavaScript is run. So the principle number 1 is the global binding. When in the global scope, the value of this will be the window or console object. Cool? The next principle is implicit binding. Let's say I have an object and I've created a context in this object, right? I have a greeting property and value of hello. Say hello, whose value is a function. So a fancy term to describe a property whose value is a function on an object is calling it a method. Okay, so I have a method here called say hello that I can refer to. So if I were to pass say hello Ryan, it's going to take the name and then console log this dot greeting, which in this case is going to say hello. Notice this pointing to the inside of this object, and then my name is name, whatever name gets fed to that. And we refer to this say hello method by calling my object dot. Okay? So what is this in this console log going to point to? Interesting. It's pointing to my object. Okay? So in this case, my object is the context for the this keyword. That's the implicit binding. It's just implied that if you're using a method on the object, that the context that you want is bound to whatever is left of the dot, which is our principle. Whenever a function or a method is called by a preceding dot, the object left of the dot gets this, like that, this context. Okay? Now there's another way of working with objects, object creators, and things like that using the new keyword. So the new binding has to do with these things called constructor functions, which we're going to go over ad nauseum. Understand this is brand new, but this is leading into that material, so it's really, really fun. You get to see this now, and you get to really, really work with it in the next lesson. But for now, you need to focus on the this keyword. So we're saying this function is going to create an object when we use the new keyword, okay? So there's going to be an object created, so we can put all of these properties on it on the this keyword. This is just referring to the object that's going to get created when we call cordial person with the new keyword. I know I said a lot there, but that's not what we're focusing on. Look at how we're using the constructor function, the object creator. We're assigning Jerry and Newman the new cordial person. Jerry is going to speak and say, hello, Newman. And Newman is going to speak and say, hello, Jerry. So when we call Jerry.speak, the this keyword will point to that cordial person. The greeter being Jerry, okay? And the name is going to log out, you know, what they're saying, okay? And then the next time we call Newman.speak, it's going to point to the different context. In this case, it's going to say, hello, Newman, okay? All right. That's what the new binding is all about. Whenever a constructor function is used, that's what we call that little pattern that we just saw. The cordial person is a constructor function. This refers to the specific instance of the object that is created and returned by the constructor function. So whatever the new keyword gets, this in one case is going to be Jerry, this in the other case is going to be Newman. So that's why we showed you the call to speak twice there, because it's new context, okay? All right, let's move on. Explicit binding has to do with a lot of the same stuff that we went through with the constructor, the new keyword binding, okay? Explicit binding, we can take that same code. In this case, we're going to instantiate Jerry and Newman, but I'm going to tweak the objects that Jerry and Newman point to. Okay, in this case, we're going to use call and apply. So anytime you use .bind, .call, or .apply, it's like you're overriding what the this keyword points to. You can give it another object. So you can kind of bind objects together in that way. It's kind of cool. It's also very confusing. So notice that these are the two new things that we just did. We added these two lines of code. So Newman and Jerry behave differently. That call, because we bound it up, is going to actually be Jerry. And then this call, when we bound it up, they're going to switch, and now it's going to be Newman. So I think the arrows are a little bit vice versa, but I think you get the point there. Whenever the JavaScript's call or apply method or bind method are used, this is explicitly defined. That's the thing you need to remember. Now that we've seen this, let's go through a couple of examples and let's code along together and figure out how we can play around with the this keyword. And just play around with it. That's really all we want to do here. Okay, so you should be able to open up CodePen, pause the video if you need to, pull out your thinking caps, and we're going to dive right in. Okay, so let's just first and foremost start by just simply in the global scope going over this. What is this? What is this pointing to in this case? I'm not trying to leave. I just want to save it and run it. Sorry, the log was too large. So too large of a log. Okay, so if you want to see the global window, all you have to do is come in here and you can see window is what this is pointing to. So in our case, this keyword, that's JavaScript right there. Okay, global. This is all JavaScript. Literally, that is JavaScript right there. That's the program right there. That's the language, everything, right? So window is the context in which this keyword was referenced. How do I know that? Well, it's not inside of anything. It's just inside the global scope, okay? So the next thing we can do, we can actually make this a little bit more useful. Remember, that's called the global binding or the window binding, okay? So the next thing that we want to do is we want to look at this in terms of the second rule, which was implicit binding. So I'm going to create an object, and I'm going to set that equal to my object. I'm going to assign that object that value, and I'm just going to say a greeting of hello. And I'm going to say that we have a speak method. And speak is going to be a function that's going to just return the string of this.greeting and world. Quintessential. Okay? Now, before we return, I want to console.log what this is pointing to. And we're going to just label that console log implicit this. Okay. And hopefully, if I call my object.speak, we'll get our logs logged out. And you clear that, and you save it, run it. Bada bang, bada boom. The implicit this is set equal to an object. That object is my object. How do I know that? Well, if we go back to the implicit binding, rule number 2, whenever a function is called by a preceding dot, the object before that dot is this. So in this case, speak is a function that's called preceding with an object. Okay. All right, that's implicit binding. Anytime you're using a method on an object that does something cool, you're using the this keyword. It's like this will be that object left of the dot. Okay. All right. Moving right along, because the other two are very important, and I don't want to go in depth on the constructor paradigm because you're going to learn all about that in our next lesson. But constructor functions are a little bit different than other functions, but not in the way they're written. The only thing we do is we just have a special syntax where we capitalize the first letter of a constructor function. And this constructor function is going to take some sort of object and then create some sort of values from that object and return that object in turn. Okay? And it's going to do that by using the new keyword. So this is the new binding. Okay? So I'm going to say this.name equals object.name because we're creating a person. And this.age equals object.age because we're creating a person. And then we're just going to say this.speak is a function that's going to return the string, hello, my name is your name, this.name, and I am this.age, years old. Okay, that's what our function does. So now this is kind of where we get to play around with our person object, because I can create Ryan, going over this ad nauseum later. So the only thing you need to care about is this keyword in this code, okay? And I'm going to say new person, but feed that person an object whose name is Ryan, whose age is, I just barely turned 32. So now when I invoke Ryan.speak, it should print out the string Ryan and 32 being the new variables. But let's console.log this keyword so that we can see it in action. And I'm just going to label that as this new binding. Okay. Save that. Let's run it. See what we get. Oh, we need to actually invoke the function. So make sure you call your name and call speak as well. Save your name. Call it. Boom. The new binding is going to be an object. Interesting. Everything is an object on this. Check out what the object refers to. In this case, it's Ryan and 32. That object that we gave to our constructor function. That's the object that this will point to. To prove that, let's create a new person. I'm going to create my son. Name, Haynes, age, 8 months. Cool. He's little. And I'm going to call Haynes.speak now. We're going to clear the console. I'm going to save it. We're going to run it. Ooh, we have a typo. Unexpected token. Where? Right here. Clear. Save it. Run it. Okay. This new binding, the first object is Ryan, age 32. Second object is Haynes. This keyword is pointing to one of these two objects. This code, if we were to read this code, we would never be able to figure out what this keyword is pointing to. But we would know that it's pointing to those once we see it getting ran. So remember, this goes back to the definition. When was this code called? it was called on line 22 and 23. So the object left to the dot should be something that tips you away, right? That lets you figure that out. Also, it's just whenever the new keyword is invoked. Okay? But now let's take it a step further and let's swap Ryan and Haynes. Let's just say that somehow I, by osmosis, like told my son, somehow he just took on all of my personality traits or something. So what's going to happen is I'm going to take my object and I'm going to tweak it. I'm going to say ryan.speak.call. Call is a function that takes that object. And I'm just going to give that object to as Haynes. Okay? And apply is the same thing. However, apply can take an array of arguments, and you can look up and see exactly what the differences are. And you're going to go into those, at length in your demo tomorrow. All you need to know is that they explicitly are binding what these two point to. So I'm going to say Ryan and then Haynes here. And if I've done my homework right, and I know what I'm talking about, which I've done this a couple times and it works usually. The first time, let's see. I want to clear this, comment that out, see what happens. I need to run it a different way. Okay, so notice that I'm calling Ryan, but I'm calling it with Haynes. So it's like we're overriding those properties. The same thing, I'm calling Haynes, but I'm applying it with Ryan. Overriding those properties. Okay? That's a little tricky, and I don't expect you to fully understand that right now. You're going to get better and better understanding these things, but just kind of seeing how call and apply work will sort of set you up for the future, especially when we get into React. And bind is very similar to that as well. It's going to be important for you to understand these things as you get further and further into object-oriented JavaScript. You're going to use them in your prototyping constructors lessons that's coming up next. So make sure you go through the items that are found in Training Kit, the challenge that's there for you to complete the Replit assignment, and practice playing around with explicit binding, because it's the only one that's like really tricky. Everything else is pretty straightforward. Thanks for tuning in.